You're listening to FFOP Radio.
Reach the
Hey everybody, and welcome to the show. My name's Dave, and this is a fistful of podcasts from FFOPradio.com. Back for another great week. Let me introduce you to my co-host this episode. You may remember him from such episodes as ones he's been in before. I think one of the last was him and I traveling through the ancient mythological tale of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. We have the namesake of the show. It's Dirty Randy back on the studio. Back on the show. Welcome, Randy.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, man. So, here we are again. I was like, you know what? Let's get Randy back on. Here's the thing. You had floated the idea of another ancient tale.
Yeah.
Ancient tales are very long, so we chose a more contemporary one. So also in studio, of course, over there on the couch today, we got Krista.
I'm here.
So, guys, let's start breaking it out. So, Randy.
Yes, sir.
This is maybe the newest pulp I've ever reviewed.
This?
Yeah, definitely, because this is way after Lovecraft died.
I would say this is the first thing, at least to my knowledge, kind of in like a Lovecraftian genre that I've actually digested.
Really? So, and that, well, I can see that because it's very, you can definitely tell that Bloch had taken in Lovecraft's influences and like everybody's influences. I've got theories about this story, but we haven't even said the name yet. So what we are going to be talking about is the Robert Bloch short story, The Ghostwriter. Now, I picked this for a couple of reasons. One, because it was relatively short. Two, the last couple of Lovecraft tales we have broken down on either this show or the live show have been ghostwritten. So I thought, we'll just go with the theme. And then I sort of saw something emerge and then later changed my mind. So this is definitely a pulp story. It feels a little long-winded. It feels a little overwritten for like the simpleness of the concept, but
yeah, it kind of seems a little like, I don't want to say elementary school, but definitely more of a early writers kind of work.
It's more accessible, sort of. I'm sure this was definitely written when he was probably, because what are we talking about? The 1940 you said before the show. He said it was this 1940, and he died in 1994, so he was relatively young in 1940. So
yeah, this was definitely one of his earlier works.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say it's there's a coin toss I'm going to come up with later. But okay, so The Ghostwriter. So basically what we got here is a story that revolves around three characters, and one of which is Robert himself. So our narrator is Robert Bloch. You don't find out until till the literal very end of the story, but it's a non-spoiler. So I'm just going to tell you now, Robert Bloch is the author.
Yeah. I had a hard time with that the whole time. Like, who is this guy narrating the story?
Yeah, I was okay with that because 9 times out of 10 Lovecraftian protagonists are not named. So I'm like, okay, whatever. This is just a recounting of a tale. But then later when like in the tale itself, it's like Robert Bloch. I'm like, okay, so we're not even got it. Okay. So yeah, what like you were saying before, it's a little clunkier, a little more elementary, but let's get into it. So it's a story revolving around told by our Bloch character about two dudes. We have Luther Hawkins and we have a Stephen Ayers.
Yes.
Now, in this situation, they are both writers, and so Luther Hawkins is the superior of the two. So Luther he's described as a South Dakota farm boy.
Yeah, a very ugly South Dakota farm boy.
Yeah, he's got blonde hair, buck teeth, he's got really pale skin and freckles on his hands, but he's like this amazing horror writer, but he looks like a hayseed who just fell off of a turnip truck. Basically, is what I get from this story. So,
he looks like a farmer.
Yeah, Luther Hawkins. He came from South Dakota. He was a farmer, and that's what he was basically. His family were farmers, and he came to New York eventually, following the writing bug. So that's basically the long and the short of Luther. He is a very talented hayseed. And then we have our other guy, Stephen Ayers. Now, Stephen Ayers is what is referred to by Bloch as a leech.
Yes, right out the gate, you can tell.
Right out of the gate, yeah, he says this guy's a leech. But before that even, and he uses this term twice, and I want to call special mention to this, because it's the craziest way to open a story. And I have not looked up this old Chinese proverb, but I think it doesn't exist. Because the quote opening the story is there's an old Chinese proverb that goes when two screwballs get together, you better watch out because zany shit's coming down the pipe. And I'm like, that is no way that is a Chinese proverb.
They really kick it off.
Yeah, they're not Confucius say, zany screwball meets zany screwball and sparks fly. No, what? Whatever. So that's the thing. They're both described as screwballs.
Yeah. I think it'd be a little hard to fact check.
Yeah. And so maybe this is also a tale of folly a Jew, even though it seems like one guy is definitely in the right and the other one is just putting up with it.
Yeah.
So we have Stephen Ayers, who basically he's one of those types of people who is a bluff. He's a liar. He says he knows a bunch and doesn't. And so the way it's described that Ayers wrote to Hawkins, who was already an established writer and had a whole bunch of stuff that was printed already, and did the whole I'm a struggling artist and I'm a huge fan of yours and I have a bunch of writings and I haven't got anything published yet, but I would love for you to help me and blah, 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 blah.
Well, he also wrote to Bloch, but Bloch kind of just started ignoring him.
Oh, yeah. Bloch. That's another thing that I think is hilarious about the through line of this story, too, is Bloch hates Ayers.
Hates him.
Hates his even after when the story is at its darkest, and you think at some point Bloch is going to have sympathy for this character. Never.
No.
Spoiler alert, he hates him.
He just wants to see him just keep going down.
Yeah, it's totally bonkers. So since Hawkins is this nice guy, I guess he just sort of takes Ayers in. And the thing about Hawkins is he is legitimately interested in sorcery, black magic, occultism, all your classic
Satanism.
Yeah, your occultism. Every pulp story revolves around a cult in some way, form, or fashion. So that's how Stephen sort of weasels his way into Luther's good graces too. Is he finds out that Luther's into the occult, and so Stephen Ayers runs to the library and reads a bunch of stuff and starts dropping stuff in letters to try and get him to be his mentor.
Yeah, he's like, "Ooh, I know you kind of like this, so let's talk about this a little bit."
It feels really scummy, especially, and Robert, the narrator, isn't sugarcoating anything. And, he's basically, here's the situation is this lazy, untalented asshole would write these awful stories and then send them to Hawkins, accompanying them with a letter, basically self-aggrandizing, but saying, basically asking for praise and also to rewrite them and make them better.
Yeah, he would send him his stories that were shit and expect this guy to make them better for him. That's,
I'm going to tip my hand. That's my first inclination of this is a Lovecraft parallel, because that's what Lovecraft would do. Lovecraft would take shitty story ideas from untalented hacks, crank out gold for $50, and then have his name wiped off the thing. But later that's overturned. So we'll talk about that later. What we have here is, for whatever reason, Stephen Ayers, starts writing stories and can no longer it's one thing to because when he's writing Hawkins, he's saying, here's my stories. I know they're great. Please tell me they're great. And then rewrite them. But then he starts sending his own stories out to places and they're like, these suck. So he essentially had to take his lie and put his money where his mouth was. And then Robert Bloch basically is like, well, and you all know what happens when a liar has to put their money where their mouth is. They become 10 times as arrogant as they were before, and it wasn't deserved before.
Yes.
So our man Ayers went from being a bombastic, confident hack to being like a godlike figure in his own mind, where now he's literally just a passable writer.
Yeah, he's just doing okay, and he's like, I'm the best shit that's ever walked the earth.
Under Hawkins' tutelage, Ayers is now a fair to Midland writer, but meanwhile, Hawkins is getting better and better and better and selling all these stories. But at some point, Ayers fancies himself the master, like the student become the master. And they start critiquing each other's work. And
Hawkins and Ayers?
Yeah, because they're in this, like, that's another thing that led me into like a Lovecraft. For me, this was a Lovecraft August Derleth parallel for a long time. So to me, it screamed of this small writing community and this hanger on and a guy who was too nice to say no. And it was, but then, the student gets too big for his britches and wants to take a swipe at the king.
Yeah, he starts poking at him and jabbing at him, telling that, like, I'm better than you, like, my stories are better than yours.
And what we will learn about Ayers later makes everything he does, like, the ballsiest. Like, if you think that, like, writing to it, like, let's say you have a hero and you write to them and you bullshit them into thinking that you have talent and you don't, that's nothing compared to what this dude is up to.
Yeah, this guy's a real winner, this Stephen Ayers. He's a leech. And, Robert got that on the nose.
Yeah, like the way Robert writes this character is like, and now that I think about it and I'm starting to like actually go back and dissect it more fully, the sympathy I had for him at the end is like almost all but gone, especially like the zaniness of the end.
Yeah, the more I think about it, I think Robert did a really good job writing Stephen in a way that makes him very unlikable.
He's like a kind of guy that he's the kind of person that you know. We've all worked with or are related to that person who will take credit for something that isn't theirs. And then, it's the same sort of bullshit. They're a fraud until they have to put their money where their mouth is, where they sink or swim. And if they swim, they come back 10 times more annoying than they were when they were sinking.
See, I told you I could do this. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, he's such an asshole. And that's the thing. He is basically dogging his teacher, and not only that, he's like giving advice to all these young and upcoming authors, and he's just like your average dick who's like, he's like a Kanye West. Overinflated ego for a mediocre amount of talent. This guy got, one scoop of mashed potatoes of talent and thinks he got a fucking mountain. So at some point, I forget, do you remember what the straw that broke the camel's back was?
No, I think it was just more that he just kept like pushing him, and like Luther just eventually said, you know what, screw this, I'm not gonna entertain you.
Yeah, and okay, so that's part of it too, is like the Robert takes a minute here to really emphasize that our boy Luther Hawkins was like a real ass wizard, because well, I mean, in as much as you could be, because, in the beginning of the book, they talk about how he's a hayseed. And as he got more popular, he goes through this sort of phase where the money and the notoriety changes him, but only superficially.
Yeah, it's only his apartment kind of looks the part, and that's really about it.
Yeah, and he wears a dark coat. Like, he goes from dressing like, overalls and a checker shirt to like, he basically, what does he do? He decorates his apartment in like onks and Egyptian and Middle Eastern and Indian stuff, and he walks around, and I think he says that he scowls like Bela Lugosi with a sour stomach.
Yes. Yep.
And so he tries to adopt this gothic attitude, but Bloch says, but he put his money where his mouth is, because when he got his money, he bought Elder Tomes. He studied the lore. He looked into all of the hoopla of the cultism and all the black magic.
Yeah, he learned as much as he could about this.
Yeah, so he was a legitimate, whatever you want to call him, whereas Stephen Ayers was just a pompous, loudmouth asshole.
Yeah, a regurgitator.
Yeah, a regurgitator. So, one thing leads to another, and the blow up happens. Like the schism is set. And the way that that Luther handles it, I think, is pretty slick, because like he's just getting totally shit talked by Ayers in all of these publications and in their clubs, and he's just a real shitbag. So Luther just stops everything. He stops writing back to his letters. He stops editing his work. He's still doing stuff for him while Ayers is being an asshole publicly to him.
Yeah. He's biting the hand that feeds him.
Yeah, and dozens of times over. So that's the thing. He cuts off all ties. Hawkins says, that's it, I'm done. But he writes one last piece. He writes an article, and it's written from the point of view of a writer being approached by a fan.
Yes.
And it's essentially this story. It's about, this allegory for him gets this little toady who comes and steals his shit, and it's supposed to be super scathing and sarcastic, and it literally destroys Ayers' reputation.
Yes, it was very well done the way he put it. He just writes about this crappy little student that didn't really know their place.
Yeah, it was like an amateur journalistic literary nuclear strike. So perfect is this article that what's his name? Steven can't get anything sold. The everyone at large, the public at large, turns on him, and he is just a ruined man as far as that goes.
Yes.
So he's basically called out as a bluff and a sham. But to heighten the stakes, something happens to Luther, and he just dies.
Yeah, he was seeing him on a Tuesday, dead on a Thursday. Cause was a heart attack.
Yeah, they say cause was a heart attack. And Robert Bloch, his character is like, oh my God, I can't believe this. It's so sudden. And Stephen Ayers shows up, and he's talking about, and keep in mind, Bloch still hates Ayers.
Yeah.
Luther Hawkins is dead. He is no more. So he doesn't even have to be polite to Ayers anymore. And so Ayers comes to him, and he's legitimately and profoundly moved and sorrowful over the death of his friend.
Super upset.
Because he still respected him, he said, as an author, even though all their bad blood, he never wanted blah, blah, blah. And he's crying, and Bloch at one point is just shut up. He literally in the story is just shut up. Okay. We don't, you were a dick to him. You did this to yourself. He's dead, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So get over it. He's like, what are you going to do? He's like, you're alive and he's dead. So now beyond that, our boy Luther, his last wish, he left his typewriter to Ayers with a sarcastic note.
Yes. Yeah. I don't remember exact words of it were, but
he tells our dude, Ayers tells Bloch, he's like, okay, so here's the thing. I got this letter, and the long and the short of it is I helped you and you still hated me. So here, please take my typewriter, the thing that made me what I was, and that produced the things that you literally publicly ripped apart, and see if you can do better.
Yeah.
It's hey man, you're welcome for the years of tutelage. Here's my most prized possession. P.S. You're an asshole and I'm dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You think you can do better? Here's my machine to go do that.
Yeah. So awesome fuck you move as far as a last move goes. So Bloch tells us, that's the thing though. He got that typewriter and Ayers started producing. He was selling stories. They were good. But Bloch is shocked and has to give credit where credit is due, because he says Ayers starts producing A-list material. However, it's a ripoff of Hawkins rather. It's his mythology. It's his everything. So I don't know if Avery comes over or they meet at a pub. I don't remember. It really doesn't matter.
Mix came to his house. I think he ended up going back to Bloch's house.
That makes sense, because all the zany shit he does would make a huge scene in the pub. But yeah, so Bloch, he's like, okay, so hadn't seen Ayers, his shit hit the roof and all, everything's going great for him and blah blah blah. But he says, Ayers comes over and he's got this like hard, cold gleam in his eye. And he's like, that either comes from a man, like from fear, a man driven by creativity or some obscure thing. And he's like, I just figured it was the creativity since he's been cranking out these awesome stories nonstop.
Well, he also says that he's sunken in and he's paler than normal and like weak looking. And he's lost a lot of his life, essentially.
Yeah, it was as if he like became a recluse and that's how Bloch...
His soul got sucked into the typewriter.
Well, not so much, but Bloch's like, he's just been working so hard and probably trying to make amends.
Driven by these stories.
So he says, okay, well, they're talking, and basically Bloch gives him this offhanded, backhanded, essentially compliment. He's like, whoa, hey, way to, by the way, making great stories. They're all Hawkins stories, but you're writing them and getting the money, so congratulations.
Yeah, great job writing these stories that aren't yours. But,
he's like,
good work.
You're ripping off the mythology, his mannerisms, his word choice.
His pattern.
But he's dead, so there you go. What are you going to do?
Yeah, you win.
This was another reason I thought Lovecraft and Derleth, because after Lovecraft died, Derleth took a bunch of Lovecraft stuff and quote-unquote finished them, but brought in Christian mythology and fucked everything up. And that's what Ayers does. Not necessarily, but I'll give you my real theory later. So Ayers starts going a little nutty, because he's like, this typewriter's nuts. I don't know what I'm writing. I just sit down and my fingers move and blah blah blah.
Yeah, the words I type aren't the words I wrote. Like the words that come out aren't the ones I put in.
He's having a nervous breakdown in front of Bloch, and Bloch is literally talking about having to hold back laughter because this pathetic character is so stupid. And but eventually our dude Ayers is finally, whatever, the grimness of his situation finally impresses Bloch. And he's like, I can't sleep. He's like, all my stories are this, and I wake up. He's like, I sell them. Don't get me wrong. I sell them, but I don't remember writing them. I don't remember, I just go into a fugue state.
Yeah, they're good, but I just sell them.
Yeah, it's totally zany.
Weird.
And because he's a screwball, remember? He's a total screwball. And it's just like a very weird... Ayers starts to drop hints. He's like, the witchcraft, how he's in the cults and blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
blah.
He talks about how Hawkins died on top of the typewriter and he breathes his last breath and soul into the typewriter. And
he tells Bloch that I thought that happens later, but he says this thing is cursed, Bloch. He says, they said, he died of a heart attack, but he literally died and fell forward onto this typewriter mere seconds after finishing the letter he wrote to me, leaving me the typewriter, and breathed his last breath over the keys.
Yeah, the note giving it to me.
And
did he say something about he cursed me or something?
Yeah, that's what he thinks. He's like, it's witchcraft, and he's cursed me, and he's all ooh. It's like he says that his soul lives in the typewriter and possesses his fingers to blah 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 blah. And so, Bloch's like, whatever, you're an idiot. Let's okay, so something makes Ayers faint though.
He faints?
And yes, because I remember I don't remember what makes him faint, but I remember it pisses Robert off because Robert says something, Ayers goes and faints, and Robert's like, God damn it, he fainted, and it took 10 minutes and the rest of my good brandy to bring him back around.
Oh, yeah, okay. I do remember that. I
don't remember what it was. Some mention of whatever, the typewriter or how he died or something made him spooked.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember what made him faint.
I remember now. Because what's his name? Bloch. He's like, let's go. Let me take you home. I'll get you in bed. We'll get you all settled away. You're drunk. He's like, let's pull the car around. And so Ayers does one of those things where he's like, okay, fine. Yeah. He feels like that relief of someone coming with him. But then remembers what the fuck is happening at home and goes, no, don't come. And that's when he freaks out.
Yeah. But that when he did one of I think it's exact words where it's like something you see out of the movies where a man grabs him by the shoulder.
Yeah, and he grabs him and he's shaking and he's like, God damn it, Ayers. He's like, we're going to go to your goddamn house.
Wake up, man.
And it's the zaniest thing. Again, I keep saying zany because they use... It is. It's like when if you were living through this, it would not be scary. It would be zany. It's like this is a comedy.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't like a scary story. This would kind of be like a Twilight Zone story you would see.
No, especially when we get to like the horrible clicking and like we'll get. So they get in the car. Bloch says, "Let's go. I'm taking you home. You're freaking me out. Plus, you're annoying as shit.
I want to be rid of you."
So they get out of the car. Yeah, they get out of the car and he's walking Ayers upstairs and he says, "Oh, Ayers lived on the second floor, and even though we knew no one was home, we could hear the ticking of the typewriter
clicking away."
And like, you could tell he was probably paid by the word because it's like 4 paragraphs of
clicking,
describing the typewriter
from a second-story window, hearing the various buttons, the ringing of the bell, the slide return, the whole nine.
The carriage return.
You can hear, the carriage return. I get it. You can hear the fucking typewriter. Go look at it.
Yeah, that part was kind of drawn out a little bit.
It was all like the genealogy. I felt it was all like all of this could have been cut, but it was getting paid by the word. So we get in there and spoiler alert, the typewriter is typing the shit out of itself.
Yes. It's just typing away.
Yeah, we get more purple prose about the keys and the pins and the ribbon, and he even makes special mention of the space bar.
And the roll paper that he uses.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's the thing. So he says, I lied. Sorry about that. Here's the real story. Yeah. I brought this thing home. I put a slip of paper in it. It typed itself. And so I was like, that's weird. So I just put a big ass roll and it just cranked out stories.
Yeah, and it was good, so I sold it.
Yeah, and so he would take it and he would sell it. It's kind of like, this blessing and this curse thing. So he says, I would load it with paper. Sometimes nothing would happen for hours or days. And then it would spring to life in the middle of the night. Sometimes it would just be short stuff. You'd put in 30 feet and there'd be 6 feet left and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, sometimes it would just be sitting there thinking of the next story.
Beyond that, like not only does it work itself, but it is a resolute, like it is the golem, the mythological Jewish golem of typewriters, because our dude Avery says, when I try and push the keys, they don't move. Yeah. They are solid as stone.
Inoperable by anybody else.
Yeah, unmovable. He says he can't move the carriage. He says he tried to bind up the what are they called?
I think he called it
the letters.
I think he just calls it the keys.
He tries to bind up the keys. He tries to bind up the all the internal mechanisms. He tries to destroy this machine without destroying this machine, because on the one hand, he's afraid because he knows that Hawkins cursed it and that if he gets rid of it, something worse will probably show up. Yes, but he's still trying to fuck with it.
The next president will show up and it'll be worse.
Yeah, and so, but that's why I was a little confused, because he's like, I want to get rid of it and just throw it away.
Yeah.
But if I do, what if something else shows up? But don't you think like the curse would be pissed off with you throwing like a bunch of fishing line into it?
Yeah, and he has the idea to do all that stuff, but he's too afraid to leave paper out of it.
Yeah, it's such a... But here, he's bending over backwards to try and explain a haunted typewriter. Yes. And it's not working.
No.
And even after it's been firmly established that our dude Hawkins is a wizard, he died on this typewriter. It types itself. That's all been established. Bloch at this point is like, no, it's some mechanical thing. So at this point in the story, he's like looking around for a wire.
Yeah, no wires found.
And keep in mind, also, you're also seeing that Ayers is like sucked out and a chased man. He is haunted by the spirit of his dead friend. And he's putting all of that aside, being like, no, it's all elaborate, hilarious trick where there's a wire leading to this typewriter that writes these magnificent stories. Hilarious.
Yeah, I don't think Bloch really cared about the typewriter writing itself. It didn't seem to strike him that much.
It was so... Well, whatever. So, so here we are. We are in the situation where it's like paragraph after paragraph of them sitting there watching this typewriter type out something and describing in great detail the horrible, frightening nature of the clicking as the keys moved or the ringing of the hideous bell. Like, there's no way you're going to make it scary. I'm sorry.
It's a typewriter.
It's a typewriter. Like, the ding of a typewriter bell, if you are old enough to understand what that sound is, cannot be taken any way in any threatening way.
No.
It's like bing. It's like a hotel lobby bell. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's like the elevator arriving.
But here we are with this fucking haunted typewriter and whatever. So then we have a big like revelation because it's kind of like the telltale heart at this point, because now, you know, it's Ayers and Bloch in this room with this magic cursed typewriter, and he's like, you know, so he has this big revelation. Ayers says, "Here's the thing. Oh God, it's time to unburden myself." Way early on, way like when they were still like when he was still Hawkins' protege, he straight up legitimately plagiarized, stole 2 of Hawkins' stories.
Well, you missed the part.
Sold them as his own. Say what?
You missed the part where Robert went over and put in a fresh piece of paper, and the typewriter started telling him that.
Well, no, because the paper tells him something later.
I thought it told him both things.
No. So the spontaneous admission is something light.
Okay.
Yeah. The spontaneous admission is a light, like slap on the wrist type crime.
Yeah.
He says,
okay. All right.
You know, full disclosure, I stole 2 of Hawkins' stories, sold them. Hawkins was pissed, and, you know, he was going to hold that against me and all this other stuff. And I always felt guilty and blah, blah, blah. So I stole these stories. And that's the worst thing I ever did. I swear, because Bloch keeps asking him. He's like, were you such a dick to warrant a cursed hellscape typewriter? And he's like, yeah, finally, here's my sin. I stole 2 stories. And he's like, that's it. Really? So you stole 2 stories, and that was enough to get this man to transfer his soul into a typewriter and haunt you? And he goes, okay. So this is when he puts the paper in the typewriter. Like the last roll finishes, and he rips it off and puts a single sheet in.
Yeah, fresh piece.
And it's so like straightforward. There's no, like, he doesn't beat around the bush. It's just our dude Luther typing out a letter to Bloch.
Yeah.
And this is when we get Bloch's name, by the way. It says, "Dear Robert Bloch."
Yeah, this is who we figure out who he is finally.
Yeah. Robert Bloch checks himself, then like does a double take at how scary it is to look at his own name being written by a ghost typewriter, and then says his name for a 3rd time. So like to really drive it home, like, Robert Bloch, I wrote this story, please buy more.
Yes. This is who
So
I
this is
am.
Robert. Yeah, dear Robert Bloch, here's the real story. Yeah, he did steal 2 of my stories. And after we had our falling out, basically, he was going to, even though his career was ruined, he was still going to be like, oh, and P.S., he stole 2 of my stories, and these are them, and was going to go like turn state's evidence to the, you know, the amateur journalist club.
Yeah.
And just like every true crime, the motive was revenge and maybe money. So what happened, like what a fucking stupid plan. And he's like, it's so simple. I can't believe how simple it was, and it worked. So brilliant. Our dude Ayers sends a poisoned letter to Hawkins. So Hawkins gets the letter, pricks his finger on the letter, and is poisoned and dies.
Pricks his finger on a piece of wood in a letter.
Yeah, there was a piece of wood in the envelope that he pricks his finger on. We don't know it's a piece of wood until later.
Yeah, there's no way that he could have known that would have worked. No.
There's no, how would a splinter small enough to go undetected in a letter carry enough poison to kill an adult human?
Exactly.
But they're also wizards, so maybe, or at least one of them's a real wizard, one's a fake wizard. So here's the thing.
I don't think Ayers is a wizard.
He could have, though, made up some, you know, because he was a devotee and as far as like lackey status, so he could have whipped up some sort of cult poison that was super toxic or whatever. So we'll give it a pass.
All right.
However, the letter continues. And so he goes, since I am a wizard, I was gifted with clairvoyance. So as soon as I pricked my finger on that letter, I knew I was going to die. So I quickly typed up the letter, leaving the typewriter to the douche there, breathed my soul into the keys, and, set the plan in motion. He's like, the original plan was just to basically haunt the fuck out of him until he went insane. But the jig is up. Here we are. Remember, this is a letter. This is being written on a typewriter to Robert Bloch standing there reading it as it's like tick, 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 ding, zick, tick, 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 tick.
Word for word.
Well, as Ayers is just watching it happen too.
Yeah. Ayers is, and that's the thing. So he says, basically, here's the evidence. Take this letter, do this. The evidence is this. Take this here to the police. Don't tell them who you are. Just report it anonymously. Get this asshole thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
This is all on one sheet of paper.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Bloch. You're my best bro.
The poison letter with the piece of wood is in my drawer, my desk. You'll find it there.
He says, yeah. The letter with the poison stick in it still in there. You'll be able to see the poison on it. There's no way that you won't be able to have an airtight case against this asshole Ayers.
This.
He deserves this. Now keep in mind, he has been an asshole nonstop. So from the beginning, he stole 2 stories. Tried to ruin him. And all this time, and then later fucking killed him. This guy was nothing but fucking trouble, and all Hawkins did was help.
Yeah. All he did was teach him and stuff.
Yeah, so all of my sympathy out the window. This guy is a 110% dick. Old-timey 1940s dick. Now, like the man in the cheesy 80s action movie, when you are out of bullets, what do you do with that gun, Randy?
You throw the gun.
Yep. So when the typewriter has finished writing its letter, Ayers feels like he has no other option than to just attack the typewriter.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this typewriter. I'm going to spike it on the ground.
Yeah, he's like, I live on the 2nd floor. This bitch is going out the fucking window. He says, and then Bloch, he's like, yeah, he picked up the typewriter and then he fell. Or that's what I'd like to say happened.
Yeah.
Why didn't he just attack Bloch? Because he was the one that was going to have to turn him in, not a typewriter.
Not only that, but he was, because number one, he was already driven crazy by the typewriter, so he wanted to attack the typewriter.
I get that, but you could have waited.
But, and also, yeah, and that's the thing too, Bloch is there, soft, pulpy, and also has been nothing but mean to him, but he's deserved it.
Yeah.
So whatever. So the story is, he grabs the typewriter and he's going to throw it out the window. And the official story is, he slipped and fell. What really happened, Bloch says, is that the possessed typewriter, quote unquote, pushed him.
Yes.
And the typewriter, quote unquote, pushed him, mashing him to the ground over and over, crushing his ribs. The bottom of the typewriter is bloody and he is smashed beneath it to a pulp.
I can just picture a big cement antique looking typewriter just bouncing up and down on top of a body.
Because imagine in your head a man picking up a very heavy turn of the century typewriter and be like, whoa, falling, and him be like, oh, it cracked my head. Then imagine it just stomping up and down in him like an elephant foot or one of those super fast pneumatic presses, just bam, 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 and just smashing him into a bloody pulp while Robert stands there horrified as this cast iron typewriter smashes this dude, not a friend, this dude he knew, into oblivion.
Well, then it's wouldn't you think that Bloch would be thinking, well, maybe I should leave because
it's not over. It's not over.
Okay.
Because now this typewriter that has smashed our dude's ribcage to a flat pulp jumps into the air, and I may be over dramatizing this, but I feel like it lifts itself from Ayers' chest, starts glowing, spins around, and blows into a million pieces.
No,
I don't know if it spins around, but it definitely.
I thought it just stayed there in his chest and typed out one last message.
Oh no, yeah, it did. It did type out one last message, but then it explodes.
I don't remember the exploding part.
trust me, I just got done listening to this because it types out one last thing. I don't remember what the last thing was. Do you remember?
I don't remember what it said either.
It was like some goodbye to Robert. It was basically because it was the last thing he was going to write before because that's the thing. The typewriter does explode. And Robert is clutching this bloody thing and he doesn't read it until after the typewriter explodes. So the typewriter goes whoop, boom and blows into a million pieces everywhere. So he looks at the bloody paper and it's like, hey, Robert, sorry about that. Looks like you're not going to be able to go to the cops, essentially. So peace out.
Bye.
And I would get the fuck out of here. Thank God it's the 40s and forensics don't exist, right?
You might want to leave.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Here we have, he reads that. He takes it with him, obviously, because it's got his fucking name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And he books it. He tears out of there after this typewriter killed Ayers and then exploded all over the room. He books it, and like the pithy line at the end, he's like, and it feels like, if this were a made-for-TV movie or whatever, the framing device would be like, you would see like a couple old hands, like wrinkled hands using a pen on a piece of paper, like in an old book. And it says, and that's the day I decided to do all of my writing with pen and paper.
Yeah.
Clonk, and you see the old guy like, dust his hands up and throw his feet up on the desk. He's like, da, 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 and he has like a donut or whatever.
Oh my God.
It feels very like, and that's it, the zaniest thing. And that was the craziest summer ever. Like when I saw a typewriter murder a man and then blow to a million pieces because it was possessed by a friend of mine.
I really don't feel like Bloch was affected at all by the events that happened. It's just like, oh, this is normal.
In the one hand, he says, I never touched a typewriter again. But it's like, oh, isn't it funny? Like, it was a hilarious thing where I saw a man's rib cage crushed to powder by a typewriter. And that's why I use a pen. Like,
that's
shucks.
his lesson is like, I'm just going to use a pen from now on.
Yeah, it's so here's what I like about it. It's very amateurish. I like the pulp. I like that the characters in their situation are true to who they are. Hawkins is a doormat, Ayers is a slimy bitch, and Bloch is me. and it's nice and refreshing to have a level-headed character in the story. Like, there's no level-headed characters in Lovecraft stories. Bloch inserts himself as a level-headed character, being like, this guy's an asshole. Because he knows from the jump. He tells Hawkins, he's like, Ayers is a toady, Ayers is a leech, stay away, this guy's a dick. But Hawkins is like, burgeoning writer, yada, yada. So here's my theory. Because of all the occultism and the demon worship and yada, 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 before the advent of the ghost typewriter, I've done zero research on this too. So this is all just blue sky theory. Because my first theory was the Lovecraft and Derleth allegory. I pivoted halfway through to a Aleister Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard allegory.
Ugh.
So Aleister Crowley came from like a farmer's background in England. He was a country bumpkin in the UK, like the three of four kids who changed his name from John Henry Smith, whatever the fuck it was, to Aleister Crowley and became a practitioner of sex and drug magic. Which is what our dude Hawkins does. He comes from North Dakota as a hayseed to become a legitimate, wizard.
Yeah.
And that part of Crowley's thing was, he thought the magic was real, but he also knew there was a lot of pomp and circumstance and bullshit to it. So he would dress the part. So with Luther, we have a poser attitude with real power, more or less a corollary to Crowley, and his devotee, Hubbard. But that's part of it too. Crowley didn't really ever take on Hubbard as an acolyte, so this is kind of more just like a jab at, but that's the thing too. Ayers, shitty writer, writes on butcher paper, all that stuff. That's all like L. Ron Hubbard earmarks. So I'm staking my reputation on this is a Aleister Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard, because more evidence to back this up. Contemporary aliveness of all the people involved and L. Ron Hubbard went on with what's his nuts from the rocket what's his nuts? Alan Parsons. Him and Alan Parsons, the rocket scientist, lived in a house together in like California and did sex magic and shit together and were writing letters to Aleister Crowley, who was like, yeah, you guys are fucking retarded.
Well, it also says at the top they're very well-known writers through their pen name.
Yeah, and
So,
that's the other thing too. So like L. Ron Hubbard, this is where the allegory sort of breaks down, because Aleister Crowley was not his Christian name. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard is his real name. Changing it to Elron, I don't know if I would call that a pen name. But he was a shitty writer, and he did write a lot of shitty religious texts that he pulled from other, pagan and other bullshit that he thought, he could sell to dummies in the 40s. Because keep in mind, too, the 40s is when Dianetics is coming. Like, this is the time when L. Ron Hubbard is, like, getting kicked out of the Navy because he's too good, when actually he's just a lazy piece of shit, and bringing up Dianetics. And would be the bane of everyone in his writing circle's existence, because he was in that sci-fi fantasy detective noir, because he was a hack and was in all of those things. And I'm sure did his fair share of shit talking, because why wouldn't you? You're L. Ron Hubbard, the shittiest man to ever start a religion based on aliens. Mm-hmm. I realize there's a lot of qualifiers there.
So
there's where my money is.
Was this... like, what was the genre that this was supposed to be? Weird
tales / horror.
This was like sounded like it was kind of like out of a short story in a newspaper.
It was in Weird Tales. So Weird Tales is that's the compelling part of weird fiction. Weird fiction can be detective, it can be supernatural, it can be sci-fi. It just have to have like an element of the strange, because you can't, I don't know if you can really nail down any of these people to any one genre. You say, well, Lovecraft is cosmic horror, but he has, dreamland stuff, and he has like his mythos stuff and his real world stuff and his Poe stuff. So whatever. Everybody's got their stuff. That's what I'm getting at. But I forgot the question.
What genre was the story? It just seems very like jokey. Like it doesn't like
it's pulp. That's another thing. Another modifier is pulp. So pulp means cheap, and cheap means tawdry. Cheap means cheap jokes. Cheap means cheap. Like, whereas, he's getting paid by the word. So he's getting a penny a word, presumably, maybe 2 cents. So that's why we have a huge ass, like the first third of the book is, here's where he's from, here's the color of his hair, here's what he wears, here's where he moved, took a bus here, he went to New York, he started a thing, blah, blah, blah. So the economy of word choice is the opposite of what you would think it would be, because he wants to make money. Mm-hmm. But what will sell? Anything weird. This is a weird story about a ghost and wizards and curses and cults. And that's why I keep harping on that too, is like weird fiction always revolves around cults. Robert E. Howard, there are cults in whatever, Hyperbolia or wherever the fuck, Tarzan or Kull or Conan, any of those dudes. It's all just weird shit. It's all stuff you can't point to and be like, that's a horror story. Because like The Shadow Out of Time, let's say, or let's say The Color Out of Space. That's an easier one. You can say it's a horror story. It's a horror story about an alien who comes and kills a family. But it's more than that. It's actually the story of a entity, a color, a being, a non-corporeal thing that cares not for the things or the people it hurts. It's just trying to get the fuck out of here. And this poor family is caught as its food source. Mm. So is it a crappy space monster story? Yes. Is it a deeper look at like the cold, unforgiving nature of the universe? Yes. Do you have to be smart or stupid to enjoy either? No, but that's the thing. Weird fiction is just that. You can sit there and be like, oh, it's hilarious because the typewriter smashed a dude. And then he says, I'll use a pen from now on. Or you can take it serious and see a man struggle internally with his lying, having to back up his lying, his stealing, and this like criminalistic behavior that essentially gets him killed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a cheap, culty ghost story that's like, whoa, the haunted typewriter. But it's also a tale of a tortured man
Well, yeah.
who kills a friend who did nothing but help and the dick who watched it all happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Robert didn't know. Like, you couldn't have. That's the thing about murders and true crime is like you don't know who's going to snap and when. Because if someone disappears, I'm sure Robert's not like. Because you'd never think Ayers, the toady, would like strike out and kill his master. But he'd ruined him.
Well, and then Robert Bloch has to, well, in the story, has to essentially live with being a witness to that murder for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
and never
'cause
talk about
Apparently
it.
he's fine with it, so.
Yeah, sure. Because you would have to be. Like, Robert Bloch is the voice of reason that Lovecraft never brought to his stories. Because in a Lovecraft story, what would happen would be, it would be the statement of Randall Carter. It would be Robert Bloch at the beginning of the story, covered in blood and oil from the exploded typewriter, sitting in front of a cop being like, you don't understand, the thing exploded, my friend was a ghost in a typewriter and he killed my other friend. But that's not how Robert Bloch rolls. He's smarter than that. So at the end, he realizes there's no explaining this away. Like, he calls the cops, they show up, they see a dude smashed, from chin to dick, a bunch of parts all over the place, and there's you holding a bloody piece of paper and a bunch of crazy stories and butcher paper and like something that has your name on it that's a confession from a ghost? No, you don't stick around to be like, here's the stitch. You get the fuck out of there. You never say another word, and you keep writing horror.
On paper.
Yeah, you murdered that guy.
Yeah, like, you wait for the dude who lives below you to smell the body, or you wait for whoever the dude works with to be like, why are you missing work? You wait for it to happen. And then when it hits the papers, you go, oh my God. As Robert Bloch, you go, holy shit. Also, you burn anything with your name on it.
Yeah.
Like,
Get
don't
rid
be
of the
stupid.
evidence.
Yeah. But Robert's smart. Robert is the level-headed, like, freewheeling, critical thinker that Lovecraft needed time after time. But that's the thing too, is like in Lovecraft stories, his protagonist is the outsider. He is the guy who's like, oh, I'm a fish monster too, or I was a mummy, or I'm a teenage werewolf, or I'm a necrophiliac, or whatever. It seems like I've only read a few Robert Bloch stories, full disclosure, but in all of his stories, his character stand-ins are always like very grounded. In Lovecraft, his protagonist and antagonist will faint left, right, and center at like bad smells or strange looks or like weird sounds. But Robert Bloch just it seems like his characters just roll through being like, this guy's a fucking weirdo. I told you. And then the typewriter came to life and killed this man.
Just fucking jumped on him a bunch.
So here's what I'm going to say. I don't know how this story found you, but the first time I went through it, I was like, okay, I get, I had my problems. I was still on my Lovecraft Derleth theory at the time. After listening, going through it a second time, getting some notes, getting some retrospective, digesting a little bit, I actually think I really like this story.
So I liked it. I felt it was a little slow, like at the gate, but like
The beginning's a little dry.
Yeah, I think the second act where they're, he's starting to have his mental breakdown and the whole like mystery starts to unravel. I really enjoyed that part.
Mm-hmm. I think personally, the first third was a missed opportunity because it felt like the first third was like, okay, here he is. He's the country bumpkin with the hay stalk out of his mouth and the blonde hair and the yada, yada, yada. So we're building him up as this country bumpkin. And, when he gets money, he gets his books. He becomes a poser. He gets dark clothes and yada, yada, yada. You think he's going to become this darker, more evil, more sinister thing. And maybe that's like one of the compelling things about Luther is like, that's all he was a poser. He was still a good guy at heart. He studied, the demoniac Bible. He probably read Le Cult de Ghouls. He probably read De Vermis Mysterious and the Narcotic manuscripts. But unlike everybody else who's always reading those cursed tomes, he stayed a good dude and was murdered by a dick who was posing as a tough guy.
Well, we missed the part where Hawkins wouldn't tell heirs to go to hell because he had too much respect for the devil.
Oh, yeah. There's a bunch of, keep in mind, there's a bunch of brilliant turns of phrase in this story.
A lot of nice digs.
It's come up a couple of times. Like in the last story we were talking about on the live show, The Curse of Yig, he talks about a shot delivered by no mortal bow. There are tons of good turns of phrase, and I wish I'd written one or two of them down, because one, Robert delivers, it was so good, and I feel like it was in the letter from the bequeathment letter from what's his face to Ayers. But that's the thing, I call this a dissection, and I want to leave some of it mysterious, because I think you should read, and or there's audiobooks of it on YouTube. You can find a couple places. It's in, I probably have it in one of my anthologies if you want to read. Mm-hmm. There are paper copies out there.
And it's a good short listen. It's only 45 minutes long.
45 minutes, something like that. So if you want to sit down and read it, no problem. You can read it on the can.
And the author actually has a good cadence to his voice where he doesn't kind of drag to listen to.
It was good that not only, because all that stuff is a audiobook version now, but I figured that for non-Lovecraftians who aren't deep into the labyrinth that is his vocabulary, I feel like Bloch is a nice step up from that, because it's sort of digested. Where let's say Dominic likes Lumley because he's sort of the same thing. He takes Lovecraft stuff, digests it, and repurposes it in more of a user-friendly modern attitude, which I don't like that. The thing about Lovecraft is I like the time period. So if you take a 20s era, Prohibition fish monster thing and put it in Angel Grove, and they gotta go to the mall, watch out for the fish guys running the Claire's, and it's whoa, zany. I want to get my ears pierced, but they keep falling off because I'm from Elizabeth.
CW sitcom.
So Randy, do you think you would recommend this to people?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice to listen to. It doesn't really take a whole lot of time out of your day, and it's not painful to deal with. So I would definitely recommend this. It's a short, enjoyable story.
Yeah, and even if you don't want to do like I do, because even outside of the show, I like to dissect things and find all the weird stuff that no one's going to. Even if you don't want to get into all the deeper stuff of it, like the zany ending, again, it's zany. The typewriter murder scene it almost makes up for the first third of the long Lovecraftian genealogy, North Dakotan friendship letter writing campaign that Ayers and Hawkins get into,
So I found the direct quote. Okay. It says the machine bounced and it splintered.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So when it splintered, so that means it blew into 1,000,000 pieces.
Yeah, it fell apart. I missed that when I listened to it.
Yeah, it's so I'm probably thinking of a wrong era typewriter, because I'm probably thinking of the 20s era, but from the 20s to 40s they didn't change much. They were still iron and heavy, and whether you have the wheel or the I don't know, parts of a typewriter, it's 2021, let's be real.
Yeah. That's 100-year-old technology.
Yeah, but that's the thing. You could, from 1920 to 1940, you could still recognize a typewriter. If from 2010 to 2021, you would not recognize a cell phone.
Yeah,
most kids. Anyway, if I showed a kid my first Palm, quote unquote Palm phone, they'd probably shit themselves. They think, "What are you going to swallow? That is it a pill for diarrhea?" I'd tell them. All right, Randy, I think that this was a success. I went into this hoping for a theme to be there, and technically there kind of was. But that's the thing. Lovecraft never killed anyone from beyond the grave.
It's an interesting story. I like hearing about it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that should be checked out.
if you can, because it can get cut right down the middle. This is Neapolitan ice cream sans the strawberry.
Mm-hmm.
It's the vanilla of the comedy, the puns, the Bloch hating Ayers. It's all that light, fluffy vanilla. And then it's like a dark German chocolate of genuine fear in Ayers and like the legitimate sad like betrayal of a friend for a seemingly no reason other than just to be like, hey, thanks for all the help. Now I'm going to fuck you over.
Yeah.
And then he kills him.
Yeah, the murder seemed a little over the top.
Yeah,
little unneeded and unnecessary.
And even in context, when you read it in context, he even like Bloch even says like, you know, we all know that we're famous to each other. We're in these little amateur writing groups.
Yeah.
So now that Hawkins is gone, like he'll be forgotten by almost no one, and the ones who do remember, you know, they're very few. And so that's what makes it even sadder is like Ayers is so pathetic that he killed his friend to regain credibility in a small subset of amateur journalists.
Yeah, he killed his mentor so he could get a little bit of
It's the weakest Faustian bargain you've ever heard. Like, a man kills his mentor and friend to sell a few stories to pulp magazines. That murder probably netted him $650. Like, because if you're getting paid by the word and he's pumping out these stories, you know, whatever. Let's say the allegory, whoever Farnsworth Wright of the Weird Tales, whatever, he's gonna be like, penny a word. Here's your $30 for this story, bitch. Like, come back when you got more. It's weird. Something to think about. But yeah, I think maybe Bloch will be something to look into because Bloch, Bradbury, I know, has a bunch of weird stuff like that. Bradbury's got some dinosaur stories that I think you would probably enjoy, especially out of all my literary correspondence, Randy. So maybe we'll talk about that.
Bradbury. I'm going to write that down.
Ray Bradbury. I've got a whole volume of his that are just stories based around dinosaurs.
Well, all right.
So we'll look into that. So, Randy, thanks for being on the show. I know you don't have much of a, you don't have another show or anything. Like, do you have a public presence you want to push? You have a Twitter or an Instagram? You have a staff recommendation?
I'll hit you with a staff recommendation.
Hit me.
I've been playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and while I think it's kind of just an okay game, it's kind of nice to see the world they built, and I think they did a really good job kind of building that atmosphere.
Good news, Randy. I've got good news. Walking simulators exist, are cheaper, look just as good, and you don't have to support companies with abusive habits.
Oh, I'm sure, but I don't. This is the first time I've turned my computer on, and I don't know how long. So
I get that. Here is what I'll recommend to you. We're, on the live show, we're going into some of the collaborations that Lovecraft has been doing. So our next one will be The Mound. After that, we'll maybe do Medusa's Coil, depending on how racist I feel. But if you like Lovecraft or you like that sort of weird fiction and you want to sort of take a step a little bit deeper than Bloch, because this is another ghost-written tale, so it's not as hard to understand. But The Horror in the Museum. Ghost-written tale by Lovecraft. It's the same sort of hokey, pulpy, like, grand reveal where, like, the villain is ridiculously, stupidly evil and switches sides really easily. Like, in the movie or the movies where the villain is super evil and they're about to kill our protagonist, and then immediately the tables are turned and the bad guy is now under the thumb of the good guy, and he's immediately like, no, I'll help. I'm your best friend. Please, just don't let me die. Like, it has that classic scene at the end. So The Horror at the Museum, if you like ridiculous pulp. That's what I'm going to recommend.
Right.
Krista, you want to recommend anything?
I can't think of anything.
All right. So if you want to get in contact with us, you can. Fistfulpodcast at gmail.com. If you ask me what my email address is, I will refer you to one of any number of episodes in the triple digits, where I will say aloud, fistful of podcasts at gmail.com. It's the name of the show at Gmail, the most popular email server in the world, .com, the most popular form of internet website. It's not .org, it's not .net, it's not .edu. Fistful of podcasts at gmail.com. 12 years. We're on Twitter, Fistful Podcasts. We're on Instagram. If you are listening to this and enjoy movie reviews and other dissections, I'm in a show with my buddy Scott, Raiders of the Lost Genre. I'll be linking to that in the Facebook and yada, whatever. You know, you guys know all that shit. So, Randy, once again, thank you for showing up and talking literature.
Of course. Glad to be here.
Pulp. Yeah. So, until next week, guys, I'm Dave.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Randy.
Saying, remember, kids, that typewriter that your dead friend died on, that goes to Goodwill. See you next week.
Fistful of Podcasts Radio.